Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to another episode of On the Couch with Creatives, the podcast for creative professionals everywhere. We are, of course, part of the Creatives Group, a private network for creative professionals to learn, grow and develop their creative businesses together. I'm Melanie Perry.
And I'm Julie Hyde-Mew.
And this is Creatives on the Couch. So, Julie, who have we got on the couch today?
So on the Creative Couch today is David Leach, Senior Creative Editor at Titan Comics. Hi, David.
Hi, Julie. How are you? Hi, Melanie.
Hello.
Great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the Creative Couch. Well, I'm going to try and encapsulate an enormous and impressive career into a few sentences, just to tell everybody who and what you are. David's career, and I'm going to be reading out of his biography, so I'll pick out a few points. David's career as a cartoonist, writer, and editor spans over 35 years, starting at the age of 23, working as a ghost artist for British animator Bob Godfrey, drawing Henry's cat. And David also created the popular character Psycho Gran for the much-loved kids comic Oink. He's worked for comics such as Whizzer Chips, Gas, Brain Damage, Toxic, Casper, Action Man, Lego Adventures, Marvel Comics in the US, written Ren Stimpy, Spider-Man, and Wallace and Gromit for a variety of newspapers. Graphic novels, too numerous to mention. I'm sure they'll come up in the chat, David, but for now they're too numerous to mention. Currently, you're editing and compiling all of Titan Comics' vintage range of comic book titles, which include Flash Gordon, Mandrake the Magician, Elric, and the classic Peanuts. Phew, so prolific. And obviously you have an incredible artistic talent. This is coming from somebody who could only draw stick figures as a kid, David, and I still can only draw stick figures. So you must have been that little kid in the corner of the class who was always doodling and drawing little funny pictures, weren't you?
I've always drawn. I don't remember a time when I didn't have a pen and paper, but I wasn't particularly good at drawing. What I had, which I think is one of the most important things that creative people have or need, is that insane obsessive determination to succeed at any cost. So every time anybody told me not to do it, I did it even more. So I just drew all the time. I loved it. And my mum always says that from a very early age, I was a storyteller. And I used to tell my sister stories at bedtime and I'd make things up. So I've always loved the idea. I've always been obsessed with story. I love stories. So that's what's always motivated me, was from a very early age, I was writing and drawing my own comic strips. And so, yeah, all of my notebooks would be filled with little flick books. I would do little action scenes with little stick figures running across the paper, doing kung fu, shooting each other, kicking each other's heads off, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, everything was like that. I went right through school just doing that all the time.
Oh, so you've also had your days of drawing stick figures. So there's
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing is that there's it's very weird. Everybody having kids, you see this in your own children. Everybody's born with the ability to draw. Everybody has it, and it's weird that there comes a point in a child's development where somebody or something happens and they decide they can't do it, and then they stop. And it's very sad because when kids draw, they draw completely free. That there's nothing that stops them. They just draw and they enjoy that whole experience. It's wonderful to see. But it's when a kid says, "Oh, I can't draw," and then they stop. I think what you develop as an artist is that you develop your own shorthand. You develop your own in your head. You have a whole library to draw on of images. So when I'm drawing comic strips, I'm not drawing anything brand new. I'm just drawing on images that are logged away in my head, and I know how to draw. So I always draw hands in the same way. I always draw shoes in the same way. So you're just creating your own dictionary, if you like, of images, and that's what you learn as a kid. And the more you draw, I'm a firm believer in this, that the more you draw, the better you will become. It's just one of those things, and I think everybody can draw, but they just get it in their head and they go, "I can't anymore," and then that's what stops you. Because I think the thing is that if adults try and draw, they try and draw exactly what's in front of them, and that's actually incredibly hard. So you have to sort of you have to cheat. The whole thing about being a cartoonist is that you learn a shorthand and you do it as quick as possible because you don't want to spend too long at a drawing board because the day's nice.
It's interesting. So when did you cross over from that point? So we went from a point of not being very good, but you just kept on because you had this burning desire that you were going to be a cartoonist.
Yeah.
When did you get your kind of first break, or when did it go from being doodles on paper or that I'm going to draw to actually getting a job as a cartoonist?
Well, I mean, that's really weird, because I basically, when I left school, so my career path was going to be very different. My careers teacher convinced me and my parents that the best thing for me was to follow my career trajectory into Ryman the Stationers, because I had a Saturday job there. And Ryman were very keen to get me on board and put me on their management training scheme, because I was actually very good at running the store. So that was going to be my career trajectory. And I was going to draw my little pictures, as was often described, my little cartoons in my spare time. But I was going to get a proper job, and then I could do all my little drawings. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll do that. So that was going to be my career path. And then literally, and I always like to use that word properly, not figuratively, but literally 2 months before I was going to leave school, I had an epiphany, which was I couldn't do that. And so I said to my mum, I need to go to art school. Now, amazingly, we lived in Ealing, and directly opposite my parents' house was the local college, and they had the Ealing College, which had their art and design department. So my mother, this is well after all the applications are closed, she walked across the road, talked to the head of the course. He said, send your son in, we'll have a look at his work. So I didn't even have a portfolio. I used to do these stupid drawings, A1 size sheets of paper with tiny little stick figures having gigantic battles. There'd be tanks, there'd be airplanes. And for some inexplicable reason, the head of the course saw something in me. He thought this boy has something. And I got on the course as long as I passed my O-levels. So in those days, you needed 3 O-levels to get on the course. In my first year, I managed to get 1 O-level. And so I had to resit. And so my first year, I got O-level in art, and that was all I had. Everything else was fails or GCSEs, or CSEs. It wasn't enough. So I did my resits, and so I needed to get 2 more. And so I resat my exams. I got an English O-level, and I got a second art one, this time in graphics. And I got an A in graphics. And so there I had my 3 qualifications, bang, I was in college. So to answer your question in a very long, roundabout way, I then went to college, and still with the complete, all I wanted to do was draw comics. And you got to imagine, I was drawing just insane amounts all the time, just endlessly drawing. So when I left college, I then I did my lower day tech, which is what they called it, diploma. Then I got into the higher day tech, or BTech it was. And I went off to study illustration and design at Watford. And then I left college, and I just started phoning people up, because this was in the great days before computers, where you could phone up somebody and say, hello, can I come and show you my work? So I got my first job, and this is perhaps my favorite story. I'm going to tell you how I got my first job, okay, in art. So I phoning people around. I left college in July, around about July time, July time. And I didn't have a lot going on. I was selling a little 3-panel cartoon strip to my local newspaper. That was about it. But I was still determined. And I managed to get an interview with a man called Mel Calman, who was a cartoonist. And he had a cartoon gallery in Lamb Conduit Street in London. So I went to see him, and I showed him all my portfolio. And he said, look, I've got nothing for you, but I got a friend who I think you should go and see. His name's Bob Godfrey, and he's an animator. So I then found out Bob Godfrey's studio number, and I phoned up and I talked to the receptionist, and she said, can I help you? I said, yes, I'd like to speak to Bob Godfrey. And she puts me on hold, and then she comes back and she goes, can I ask what this is about? And I said, yes, I've been to see Mel Calman. Mel Calman told me to tell Bob that he needs to see me. And she said, hang on a minute. And she goes away, and she comes back. Actually, she doesn't come back. Now it's Bob. And Bob says, hello, because that's how he used to speak. Hello. And I went, hello. And he went, apparently I have to see your work. And I went, yeah. And he goes, well, you better come in and show it to me, haven't you? And so I then had my first interview. So I went along and saw Bob, and I showed Bob. Now, Bob had a fantastic animation studio in Neal Street, Covent Garden. It was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. It's now, sadly, a shoe shop. It's horrendous, but it used to be a great studio. So I went to see him, and I showed him my work. And he went, yeah, I love your work, but I've got nothing for you, but I'll bear you in mind should anything come up. And I thought, oh, well, fair enough. Now, this next part's not going to sound believable, but it's absolutely true. Christmas Eve, I get a phone call. Hello, David. hello. I couldn't remember who it was. And he went, hey, listen, are you still looking for a job? And I went, I am. He went, brilliant. He said, why don't you come January the 2nd and you can start working for me? And I went, okay. So by this point, I realized who it was. So January the 2nd turns up. This is back in 1980, I think 6. So London was a lot different. So January the 2nd, the whole place is deserted. Also, it's snowing. I remember that vividly. So I'm walking through Neal Street, my first job, I'm going to my first job. I get there, I press the buzzer. He lets me in. I have to go all the way up to the 5th floor, which is where his studio was. Now, Bob at this point just turned 60 and he cycled everywhere. He used to cycle in Lycra. So he was a 60-year-old man. He was quite skinny and he'd be dressed in Lycra. So he's sitting, he's the only other person in the whole building. And I go upstairs and I arrive and he looks up from his drawing board and he went, who are you? And I went, I'm David Leach. And he goes, what do you want? I said, well, you phoned me up on Christmas Eve and said, did I want a job? He went, yeah. And I said, I did. And he said, okay, come in today. And he went, oh. And he looked around the studio and he went, well, that drawing board's free. You can have that one. And that's how I got my first job. So
it's a marvellous story. If only it was that easy for some of the rest of us, isn't it?
I do think you asked me for 3 tips to give to tell to young people who are starting out. And this is, I'll give you 2 tips right now. And the first tip is, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah.
And the second one is, make sure you're in the right place at the right time. So there we are.
And a bit of chutzpah, let's be frank.
Yeah, and a little bit, definitely. Because I think the thing is that what you need, and I think I'm a cartoonist, I'm a writer, and I'm an editor, but the main thing is I started out as a cartoonist. You've got to be, the one thing I'm amazed when I meet young students, they're all really shy and timid. I'm like, ta-da! I once went to the BBC, right? And I saw one person at the BBC. This is when you could phone up an art editor and you could go in and meet them. And I showed him my portfolio. And I used to do like, it's almost like a stand-up routine where I'm cracking jokes, I'm getting manic, I'm describing stuff, I'm bouncing off the walls. It started with one person. By the end of my interview, everybody in that studio was standing around me laughing and clapping like I just done a one-to-one. Because that for me is the part of it, is that it occurred to me that I don't need to be the best cartoonist in the world. But if I can make you laugh and if I can connect with you, you're going to remember me and you're going to give me work when it comes available. And that's what happened. That's how I got my jobs, was because I made sure I was memorable. Years later, I worked for Bob for 1 year and then I went freelance. Now, so when I started working for him, I was 23 years old. When I turned 40, I went back to college and I retrained as an animator because I loved working for Bob and I really enjoyed animation. He taught me basic animation. So I was on this animation course. I was the oldest person. And one day, Bob came in to talk to the students. Okay, now I hadn't seen Bob for 17 years. Okay, so he comes into the studio in front of all of the students sat there, and I'm in the back, and I knew Bob, and I thought, well, I'll go and say hello to him at the end of the thing. He looks around the room and he stops and he sees me and he points at me. So everybody's sort of like, oh, and they all look at me and he goes, "You're David Leach." And I went, "Yeah, I am." And he went, "You used to work for me." And I thought, wow, you've remembered me 17 years later. So what I'm saying is that I make sure that when you meet me, you never forget me. Make sure you're memorable. The trouble is that nowadays, it seems to me that many people that you work for, they go and check out what you've been saying on social media. So you've got to be ever so careful what you say and do. But I always say that if you can, I do this as an editor, is that I build a rapport and a friendship with my artists, because I think that if you have a rapport with someone that you're working with, especially as an editor, and you need your artist to be delivering work on a regular basis, if you have a rapport with somebody, they're going to want to work for you. They're going to want to produce the best work. I just finished doing one of the things I do as a senior creative editor at Titan is not just the old vintage stuff, but I'm also doing brand new stuff. Like I do 3 different Blade Runner titles. I'm doing Rivers of London. I'm also doing graphic novels. So we did one of the Phantom of the Opera, and I just put one to bed, which was an adaptation of The Man That Fell to Earth. So my artist for The Man That Fell to Earth was an Indian artist called Dev Pramanik. He's based in New Delhi. And I had a situation where using Gmail, we would chat, where you can just like write a message and it automatically appears on his desktop. So he was always able to contact me whenever he wanted to. And so we would just chat. And there came a point where he was finding it hard, the whole lockdown and everything like that. And so there was one day where I was sat at my drawing board and he was sat at his drawing board, and we just chatted and drew together. And it's that sort of thing which you develop with an artist, which is wonderful, because you sort of you have a connection with them, and I think that you sort of forget, if you're not an artist, how lonely it can be. You know, and then when you're drawing on your own, the self-doubt creeps in, the sort of the fear of it. And there's stages to creativity, which can be terrifying. There's a bit where you begin to hate what you're doing, and then you realize that what you're doing is the worst thing in the universe, and that when it finally appears in print, everyone's going to hate it and your career is over. And then you start doubting how good you are. And you have this constantly. But if you're able to talk to somebody, all that doubt gets pushed to one side. What was your question?
I think we've forgotten. No, we've gone so far away from it. But in any creative pursuit, it's so nice to bounce ideas off other people. You're so right about working in isolation for a creative person can be very lonely.
Definitely, absolutely right. It can be. But I mean, the funny thing about creativity is ultimately it comes down to that creative person producing and creating something. So there will come a point where they have to be on their own. But the thing is that at least when I find it very weird. I mean, I used to work from home, but when I was a freelancer, I worked from home. But it's very different from actually having, so my office behind me, or I'm actually sitting in my library. So the computer behind me on the table is my work computer. And the one I'm talking to you now is the home computer. So during the daytime, my wife sits here and I sit over there. And it's very strange. But the weird thing is that this library, which used to be my favorite room in the house, is where I could escape to. I mean, you can only see a little bit, but every wall of this room is full of books and comic books. And there's a window, obviously. I need some light. But beyond that, but it's weird that when you've got your office in your favorite room, you can't escape from it. And it's very strange not to be able to escape your work life. I find that quite weird, I have to say. I don't know why I'm just told that.
Sorry, do you still doubt yourself, or do you like to bounce ideas off other artists and writers?
Right. Do I still doubt myself? I doubt myself every time I pick up a pen, because it's very weird. When I'm older than I'm older than I was. Strange enough, age has caught up with me. So I find that I don't have the same creative energy that I used to have. I mean, I used to. The weird thing about being creative is that it's like a drug. It's the most exhilarating. When I'm creating something, when I'm drawing, I'm in a state of almost permanent high. It's extraordinary. The buzz I get off it, it's exhilarating. I'll often find that the hairs are standing up my arm now. When I'm working, I am so buzzing on the adrenaline and all the energy. It's exhausting. If I do a proper day's work, one of the great things happened to me was I got furloughed for 11 weeks. And so what I did was I used that time to write and draw a 32-page comic book. And I just thought, this is how often am I going to get the chance to have all this free time? What am I going to do with it? And I didn't want to waste a second. So I spent 11 weeks. I was doing 15-hour days, 7 days a week for 11 weeks. And it was just bliss. It was so wonderful. And every day I went through that whole stage of hating it, loathing it, thinking I was wasting my time. And then the next day I'd look at what I'd done the day before and go, that's not too bad. And then I'd be relieved. So that you never get over that thing. And I think you need that because it forces you as an artist to be better. It's when you start resting on your laurels, that's when you've got to start worrying. I think every single thing you do, as I do as a cartoonist, has got to be better than the thing I've done before. Otherwise, what's the point? I need to keep pushing forward. I can't, even though I'm still drawing comic strips, I can't stagnate. I've got to keep trying to produce new things. I've got to keep creating something. Otherwise, so here's something weird, okay? Here's something weird. If I close my eyes, right, all I can see is images, energy, buzzing all the time, okay? In my entire adult life, there have been 3 occasions where I've closed my eyes and it's been pitch black with nothing there. And it is the scariest, most terrifying thing I know. Wow. So beyond that, my brain is just insanely on the go all the time. From the minute I wake up, my wife is the complete opposite. So she takes ages to wake up. Me, as soon as I'm awake, I'm like, what can I play with now? Yay! Everything. You just have to do that. It's just mad.
Tell us more about your comic book.
So the comic I did over the 11 weeks, I do another comic, which is one of the things I genuinely hate about comics is when people do autobiographical comics. And I find it quite embarrassing. So I went out and did my own autobiographical comic. It's called David Leach Conquers the Universe. And it's going to be a 4-issue miniseries. And it's basically, the idea is there's a cartoonist called David Leach. And he wants to be left alone to draw comics. But he keeps being forced to save the world from a secret organization called They. And the thing is that they control his life. You know that thing where you go, you'll never guess what they've gone and done. Well, this is them, the they. So he wants to be free. So there's another organization called Mars, which stands for Megalomaniac Action Reaction Squad. And they hire David to save the world from disaster. So David is trying to stop the they from controlling his life. And each of the 4 books is basically David trying to just be left alone so he can enjoy his comic books. So issue 1 I've drawn, issue 2 I've drawn, and issue 3, which is a really big one and ends on an absolutely shocking cliffhanger, which is the final panel says, David Leach is dead, David Leach is dead, David Leach is dead, and David Leach is dead. And that's the cliffhanger to the 3rd book. I need to finish off the 4th one. So the 4th one, which I've written, I just need to start drawing it. The weird thing is that when I do Psycho Gran, she was my first cartoon character. And I did that for that kid's comic Oink. And funny enough, I got the Oink job while I was still at Bob Godfrey's. So I've always wanted to draw. This is the thing. I was never interested in drawing serious comics. I've always wanted to do funny stuff because I consider myself to be a funny person, and not just looking, but I think I can make people laugh. Okay, I have an innate ability to make people laugh. So as a kid, I couldn't care less about drawing realistic comics. I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to do humor stuff. So this kid's comic came out. So in those days, if you went into Smith's, there'd be literally dozens of kids comics: Buster, Dandy, Beano, Whoopi, Whizzer Chips. And then there was this advert for a new comic called Oink. It was the first kids comic I ever read that made me laugh, because most kids comics weren't actually that funny. They were amusing stories. They'd always be, somebody getting their own back on authority. But Oink was different. When I saw Oink, I knew I had to be in it, and I created Psycho Gran. So I got in contact with Bob Painter. Now, Bob Painter said to me, I sent him my work, and he goes, I like your work, but I'm only going to send it to Oink if you do a job for me first. So I had to do, obviously what later transpired, that an artist must have dropped out or something. They had 2 cartoon characters called Brad Habit and Phil Fit. And they wanted to do a 4-issue pull-out section in Whizzer Chips, which would be about Brad Habit and Phil Fit. And so I drew it. And that was my first. And he said, if you do a good enough job on that, I will send your work to Oink. So I did that. I did a good enough job. He sent my work to Oink. And the next thing I know, Psycho Gran has been picked up. And I was like, wow, incredible. So that's how Psycho Gran came into being. And so I started drawing, and she started out as a half pager or 6 panels. And then from that, she then became 3/4 of a page, then a full page. And she appeared in the annual and the summer special. The Oink didn't last very long. It lasted about 60, 70 issues, I think, but it had a profound impact. Charlie Brooker started working on Oink, and a lot of cartoonists who are working today got their break on Oink. Banks, the Financial Times pocket cartoonist, he had a strip in Oink too. He had several strips in Oink. So lots of famous cartoonists all got started on Oink, and it was a wonderful thing. And if you meet cartoonists today, they'll talk about Oink. And for me, it's delightful when you meet people and they go, oh, I used to read your stuff. And you go, no, you didn't. And then they quote things back to you. It's very rewarding. So anyway, so that was Psycho Gran, and I drew Psycho Gran. And then when Oink folded, I basically just thought I would retire Psycho. So I stopped drawing Psycho, and I didn't draw her then until 2012 when I brought her back. So she stopped appearing in 1990, I think, and then she then took an absence, and then I brought her back, and I've been doing her ever since. I mean, she's the world's most violent old lady. She is an absolutely appalling human being. I mean, she has a deep loathing of rudeness. If you're rude to Psycho Gran, it will end horribly for you. Psycho Gran's an appalling character. She's genuinely evil. So one of the comics I do when she's not appearing in Aces Weekly, I collect her comic strips and that, and I put it into a comic, and then my local comic shop publishes those for me. But the other thing I do with her, which I'm very, very pleased with, is called Psycho Gran Versus. And what she does in that is every issue she beats up superheroes. So it's one page, her kicking and punching superheroes, usually in the genitalia, because there is nothing funnier than watching an octogenarian punching or kicking Superman in the testicles. I don't care who you are, you will laugh. I find that amazing. I find the fact that you can draw a gag without any words, and it can make people laugh. That is such a buzz. I describe Psycho as surrealist slapstick, because I think that sort of sums her up, that it's very surrealist, but it's slapstick. Because the great thing about slapstick is you can be incredibly violent, but because it's slapstick, it's okay. There is one cartoon that I drew, which is Psycho Gran versus Wonder Woman. And I spent ages trying to think how she would defeat Wonder Woman. And I realized that she wouldn't, that she would snog Wonder Woman, because I think any of us given the opportunity to snog Wonder Woman would snog her. So what I did was, there's a famous photograph from the end of, on VE Day of the American sailor, and he's grabbed the nurse and he's pulled the nurse over and he's kissing her. And if you actually read up about that photo, it's a lot more unpleasant than it looks, because
he forced himself on her. It wasn't romantic at all.
No, not at all, but it looks romantic. So what I did was I used that pose. I had Psycho Gran bending Wonder Woman over and snogging her. But because Psycho Gran is 5'2" and Wonder Woman's over 6 foot, I put Psycho Gran standing on a set of steps. So the idea is that she would have pushed the steps up to Wonder Woman, climbed up the steps, grabbed her, put her in the clinch, and then snogged her. Anyway, that's the one that always gets shocked parents. It's not her kicking Superman in the testicles or punching Spider-Man in the genitals. It's none of the punching people in the face and all that. It's two women kissing is the one that sets parents off. I find that amazing. Kids think it's hilarious. That's the one that kids show their mums. Look, Mum, look, she's snogging Wonder Woman. Kids love it, but parents are the ones that panic. I find that very bizarre.
How do you get away from licensing problems? I mean, can you really just take all these superheroes and just use them at will? Surely there's some sort of licensing involved?
Well, basically, my way around it is the American way around it, which is that if it's for parody purposes, you can do it. So I'm drawing my versions of these superheroes. So for example, my Batman is the Adam West Batman from the 1960s TV show. So I'm doing cartoon versions of them. They're not realistic. So I always say that it's not real. So far, I haven't been approached by Marvel or DC. No one's tried to stop me from doing it because it's just parody. It's comedy. I'm not trying to make money out of it. So I don't put Spider-Man or Superman on the cover. It's only images inside. There's no dialogue. Because it's parody, that's my get out of jail clause, which is I'm doing it for comedic value. I'm not trying to make money off the back of any of your characters. So, But I hope that sounds like the court of law.
Well, Disney, I used to work for Disney, and Disney at one point were very, very, very hot on people if they, reproduce their characters and whatever. But over recent years, especially even up to the time when I left, well, good 9 years ago now, they actually got a lot more relaxed because they began to realise, and this is the power of social media as well, that kind of any publicity is good publicity as long as it's not bringing the company into disrepute. So things like people who are doing parodies with their characters or whatever and putting like the Disney message out, actually, it's free publicity for them. And they're not as, I'm going to sue you for reproducing that character, as much as they were. So I think they've realised that working with people and building, relationships with people who use their characters actually works much better for them than if they try and sue the pants off people every 5 minutes.
I agree, but also remember, I'm not trying to sell. So I'm not doing Disney. I'm not doing merchandise with their characters on it. It's like it's the lead character. It's just that she's beating up all these people. So it's not like I'm putting a title on every single page that says Spider-Man, Superman. No, you need to know who these characters are, otherwise it doesn't work.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah.
And I said, listen, that's my argument.
All right. Okay. And you're sticking to it.
I'm sticking to it. Yeah, until I'm stopped. I can do with the publicity.
So what do you do when young cartoonists or graphic designers come to you and say, would you look at my work? I want to work with you. Do you give them as much of a leg up as you were given?
Well, the interesting thing is that I do a lot of as a creative editor at Titan. I see lots of artists. So whenever I do a convention in Spain or Holland, for example, I have to do portfolio reviews. They'll invite me to the show. I go along as an editor and I do portfolio reviews, and I give people honest criticisms of their work. Some of those people I then, if I think they're good enough, I then take back to Titan and I say, I found these guys, I think we should work with them. And I have found a few artists that way. So they're different. They're wannabes. So they're on the cusp. Some of them you'll meet and they're no hopers. They'll never make it. There's a few sad things. There's a few truisms which are regrettable but true. Sometimes you'll meet somebody and they're the right age and they'll take the advice and they'll get better. But you'll meet people who are still trying to break into comics and they still want to do superhero comics, which is what they all want to do. But they're in their 40s, and for them it's too late. You know, that if you're still giving them, and it's a horrible thing to say. So your question is actually a very interesting question, but the thing is that there's no one single answer. I will happily look at anyone's work. I will happily give advice. I have no problem with it, and I try and be as supportive as ever. When I was starting out, there was one cartoonist who I'm not going to name, who when I showed him my work, he basically said, "Give up, stop. You're never going to do it. Just don't waste your time. Go off and illustrate kiddies' books. You're never going to be a cartoonist." And that absolutely broke me, and broke me for about 2 weeks. And then one morning I woke up and I thought, bleep, 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 bleep. I'm going to show that bleeper. And it made me even more determined because I was so angry. How dare anybody tell me not to do it? I couldn't care less. I was going to do it. And that's what I talked about earlier on, is I was laser focused. When this is the important thing about age thing. When you're 20 years old, okay, there's nothing stopping you. You can put your laser target on the whatever it is a mile away and you go for it. You don't stop. Nothing stops you. When you're young, you have no responsibilities. You can achieve whatever you want. Obviously, I realize this isn't entirely true, but this is how I looked at it. That was my focus. That was my goal. Nothing was going to stop me. Okay. Every time you told me no, I would do it 10 times harder because I didn't care what you said. So what you asked me for other things, other things I would tell people, and I do tell people this, so I'm going to have to swear now. Basically, here's one of my other truisms for anybody starting, which is, fuck them if the worst thing they can say to you is no. Okay? If that's the worst someone can say to you, no, who cares? Move on to the next one. And also, fuck them if they can't take a joke. If they can't take a joke, who cares? Move on. It doesn't matter. Don't be embarrassed about what you do, okay? These people won't remember you a second. If they're not going to use you, they're not going to remember you. So it doesn't matter. So you just got to be thick-skinned. You've got to be laser focused and thick-skinned. But you've also got to not be stupid. You've got to listen to what people say to you. So you've got to take advice. It's a really hard thing. You've got to realize this is the funny thing is, my mother would give me advice and I would ignore her. And then I'd go and see somebody and they'd give me exactly the same advice. And I'd come home and tell her what they said to me. And she'd say, "But that's what I told you yesterday." And I'd go, "Yeah, but that's you. And this is them. I don't want to hear it from you. I want to hear it from them." So that's the thing. You've got to be, because this is, oh my God, your questions triggered so many things. Here's something really weird. And this is what really winds me up when I'm looking at students' work. They'll show me their portfolios and they are programmed to put their work in chronological order. They'll put their oldest stuff at the beginning and the new stuff at the end. Okay. And then I look at their work. I can tell from one page of artwork if the person I'm looking at is any good. One page is all it takes, okay? And I know that sounds a bit like arrogant. It's not entirely. It's not supposed to be at all. But I've seen so much comic strips. You can tell from one page if they're any good. You can also see things that go wrong, and you can point to an artist and you'll say to them, "That's wrong," and they will go, always. This has always happened. This has never not happened. They will go, "Yes, I know," and I always go, "So why are you showing it to me if you know it's wrong?" Don't show me anything that you have to apologize for. If you're showing me your work, it's got to be the best work you produce. I don't care about your journey. And I really hate when these students, they give me their CVs to read. I don't care. I don't care if they came first on their course. I don't care how many GCSEs they've got or who their references are. It does not bother me one iota. All I care about is their artwork. That's all I care about, because I think everything else doesn't matter. But they'll put their CVs at the beginning. I'm not interested. They'll put their oldest stuff at the beginning. I'm not interested. Show me your new stuff. Show me the stuff you did last night when you couldn't sleep because you were nervous about seeing me today. Let me see what you're doing now. Then I'll look at your old stuff and I can see the journey you've taken. But don't start off with the crap and then get to the good stuff, because it gets boring. I had to do 7 hours of portfolio reviews at a convention recently. 7 hours. That was exhausting, because most of the people you're done with them in 10 minutes, but they're all given half an hour slots. So then you sit around for 20 minutes, right? And you can't leave. You've got to wait there. So you can look at someone's work and in 10 minutes flat, you can tell them everything you need. But that's only come because I've spent 35 years making comics.
What do you look for these days in a commercial property that you know is going to sell, and what is stuff that just really won't?
Comics have changed so much. So basically, Titan we experimented with what's called creator-owned comics, okay, where people come to us with their own characters. So we would have well-known writers and artists would come with a package, and we produce the comics. But the fans don't care, okay? They're not interested. So what Titan do now is that we pick up licenses to successful video games, films, TV shows, and we create brands based on those existing properties. So we expand the properties, like with Blade Runner, like with Rivers of London, Dan Dare, all this sort of stuff, Life is Strange, Bloodborne, all these things. And we produce comics based on this thing because it has a built-in fan base. People want to read more of this stuff. Every cartoonist. This is the other weird thing, right? When I started out, I didn't realize that you could get paid for writing comic books. I genuinely thought, because in the old days when I read comics, they didn't get credited. So when you saw a comic strip, I assumed that the person who drew the comic had also written it. So that's what I did. I would write and draw my own stuff because that's what I thought cartoonists did. So it came as a delightful discovery to discover you can make a living just writing comic strips. Wow, that's nice, I thought. But the weird thing is that I learned my trade by starting on a half page, working up to a 3/4 page, doing a full page, then trying a 6 page. I didn't start writing a 22-page comic book. Most comic books are 22 pages in length, okay? The actual strip part, the actual comic length is 32 pages, but most strips are 22 pages, okay? Not all, because I know that there were people out there who go, "Oh, Leach made a mistake, let's kill him." Okay, that's why I'm living in secret so no one can find me. Anyway, so most comic strips are 22 pages in length. Most young people starting out, when I say young people, I mean young creative people trying to break into comics. If they're a writer, they have an idea for a comic which is going to shatter the world. It's the most spectacular thing. But it's not just one comic. It's not just a 6-page story. No, my God, this story is an epic. It spans a galaxy. It covers 1,000 years of history. It's incredible. It's going to be earth-shattering, and it's going to sell 1 million copies, right? I once had the mispleasure of talking to somebody who wanted to be a writer, and I knew it was a bad idea. I knew it, but I allowed him to contact me. And over the telephone, before he had even told me his idea, I told him what the plot was to his idea. And there was this stunned silence. And he said, "How did you know?" I said, "Because all you guys, when you start out, this is what you do. You do great big epics. They're massive sagas. None of you just do anything small. None of you start small. You go and write epic. It's never going to work for them. They're not going to do it because in comics especially, you haven't got your training. It's the X Factor effect. It's people thinking they're going to get discovered and they're going to be the next big thing without doing any of the hard work to get to that stage. And when it comes to comics, I think anyone who wants to start out in comics, they should try writing small. If they want to write superheroes, then what they need to do is 2000 AD did this great thing where they get people to send in. Well, no, they don't get people to send in, but people send in ideas for short 6-page stories with a twist in the tail. Okay. If you can write one of those, if you can write a 6-page story that has a twist in the tail that's science fiction, if you can do that, you can write almost anything. I've always thought the hardest thing to write is a 3-panel cartoon strip for a newspaper. I once had to write Ren and Stimpy strips. Ren and Stimpy was this wacky cartoon animated show back in the 90s, really batshit crazy. I used to have to write gags for that. But my instructions were, it was by Nickelodeon, my instructions were that none of those gags would have punchlines. So I had to write funny cartoon strips without punchlines that would still make people laugh. That's a challenge, okay? In 3 panels. Writing a Wallace and Gromit story, which would be it started off as 5 daily strips. You'd have to write a story that lasted 1 week. It was 3 panels. Each panel would have to have a gag and tell the story that would run across a whole week. Okay, that's a challenge. That's a really hard challenge to write jokes like that. And I think that a lot of writers, they start too big and they don't realize. And the other thing is, I think when you write comics is a very strange medium. It's not like TV. It's not like film. Writing comics is very strange. There's many secret rules which we don't share because we don't know what too many people. That's a lie, sorry. So, for example, Marvel Comics had this great rule, which I still believe in, because I worked for Marvel. I was an editor at Marvel Comics, the UK. One of the great rules they had was that your speech balloons, you should never have more than 30 words in your speech balloon. Now, that's a real challenge, and I still do it to this day. If I've written a balloon, if there's more than 30 words, I rewrite it. So the idea is, how short can you make this where it's still interesting, the voice is still unique, and you still get your information across? In 30 words. That's a real challenge. And I think it's all these sort of things like having too many characters speak. But I'm trying to go back to your question, which was, what was your question?
I think you've got into my next question, which was, can you give us your top 3 tips? And I think you have already.
No. I've got 3 top tips for writing. Now, these are very important. One is the 30-word rule. Okay, that's really important. The other one is a really, now this works for TV and film. Okay, it's something I genuinely believe in. Whenever you're writing a scene or whenever you're writing a story, start your story as late as possible and get out of your story as soon as you can. Don't hang around. I always give this example. If your story is about a man who gets up in the morning, goes to work, and when he's at work, he gets hit by a meteorite and he gets turned into a superhero, when do you start that story? Do you start that story when he wakes up in bed? Do you start that story on his way to work? Do you start that story when he's in the office? When do you start your story? Now, that works for scenes as well. Start your scene as late as possible and get out as soon as you can. Don't hang around. Once you've done your bit, bang, move on to the next thing. Keep your stuff moving. You've got to keep the momentum going. The other thing is, what's the other thing? The other thing is, I've forgotten. They're in my head, right? And I've forgotten what they are. This is number 3. Yes, number 3. Start your scene. Yes, the other one is never go back. So if your character's left the scene, if they leave the room, don't then go back to the room. Once they've left that room, move on. Keep moving forward. Don't. I mean, obviously. So Stephen King, when he talks about writing, he believes that plot is the enemy of story. Okay, I'm paraphrasing, but the idea is that when Stephen King writes, it's a train of thought. Is that his stories start, he works out his characters, and then once he puts the story in motion, the characters reveal the story as it goes along. I am the complete opposite. I believe that plot is everything. When I'm writing anything, I cannot start until I know the very last line of dialogue. So until I know the punchline, I can't begin something. Now, the punchline might change, but when I start, I need to know how it's going to end because I have to know what the end is going to be. So that's something else which is very important. So for me, I think that when you're plotting something, especially in comics, because you have a 22-page thing, if you have to tell a story in 22 pages, you need to break it down. It's like, how do you need to know? If you were given this job, you need to go into that room and eat an elephant. There's an elephant in the room. You need to eat it. I can't eat a whole elephant. But if you chop that elephant into little chunks, you could eat an elephant. We all could. We could easily eat an elephant. It might take us a while, but if you approach the comic strip, anything like that, in the same way, which is rather than think about it as a 22-page, you break it down. So, for example, I used to have to write Action Man comic strips. Now, Action Man was a 6-page comic. I'd be given the Action Man of the week and the toy they wanted to promote, and I'd have to write the stories. So now I'm thinking, oh my God, I've got 6 pages. That's a lot. What am I going to do? And then you go, well, hang on a minute. Page 1 is when you introduce the Action Man and the toy, and page 6 is the punchline. So now I've only got to write 4 pages, And so what you do is you keep whittling it down until you can manage it. So, and then the other great rule is that it's not the writing that's important. It's the editing and the rewriting. So when you first write, just get everything down first of all, and then you rewrite it. But I've saw 2 other rules as well. It's like that great Monty Python sketch about the Spanish Inquisition, and he keeps up. You're
getting value here, folks.
Yes, you are getting value. So I'm going to try and stay on track in case I forget. So yes, editing is important. It's whittling things down. It's when you've written something, you go back and rewrite it. But you want to be careful of that, because I always think that if you write something one day and then the next day you read back what you've written the day before and you start rewriting it, you'll waste the second day rewriting what you did on the first day. And then the third day you go back and you reread what you read on the first and second day and you rewrite again. So keep your rewriting until you finish the whole damn thing. Otherwise, you'll never get to the end. Okay? So you don't want to have to keep rewriting it, because the more you write, the better you will become. Okay, that's very, like everything, the better you become. And also, so if you're going to rewrite, just spend the morning rewriting and then rewrite in the evening. Now, here's something which I struggle from: writer's block. Now, I believe that writer's block isn't just about writing; it's about anything creative. That there comes a point where you get stuck, and you're sitting there and you're thinking, "Oh my God, how do I get out of this?" And then you suddenly go, oh, wow, hang on, I've had a much better idea. Wow, that first idea is crap, but this new idea is brilliant. And so you push the one idea to one side and you start writing a new idea. And then you get to a point and you go, oh, no, what am I going to do now? I'm stuck. And then you go, wow, I've had another idea. This is even better than those first 2 ideas. And then you move on to the third idea. What happens is that you never finish off any one idea. So if this happens to you, when you suddenly get that next brilliant idea, write it down in a book, the idea, and then go back to your first idea, because your brain is basically stopping you from working. And your brain will, if you're creative, you're fighting your brain constantly. There are two halves of your brain at work all the time: the creative side and the bit that needs to make money to pay the bills. And that bit will actually ruin you all the time. So you need to basically find it in a corner and beat the living shit out. You know, I'm just trying to think of all the things that have helped me. There was one I suddenly thought of as I was talking. Another tip which is really useful. I can't remember what it is now. Hang on. Write what you know. Obviously, it's write what you know. That's an interesting one. The writing what you know one is, everyone thinks that means that if you want to write about a plumber, you've got to be a plumber. But that's not true at all. It just means you need to know what it's like to have worked, and then you can at least research what it is to be a plumber and make those two things work. But that wasn't what I was going to tell you.
So what comes first with you, though, the story or the pictures?
I can't. There's no answer to that question. I once got asked how I jumped from project to project. How do you go from being a cartoonist to an editor to being this and that? And I said, I don't see it that way. For me, it's all part of the same thing. So when I'm writing, I will. Hergé, who did Tintin, did this. He would do wonderful doodles. I doodle it and I write it, and then what I do is once I said do. When I finished an idea, I then typed the whole thing up as a full script. So even though I'm going to draw it, I describe every panel in detail and all the dialogue, just so I've got it on paper, because I think that's helpful. And then I'll rewrite it again anyway. But I need to get it down. I need to do it properly. I need to have all the stages. One of the things I found when I was furloughed and I did my comic book issue 3, I started just to try drawing it from the Word, and it wasn't working because I had to go through that phase. I had to write a full script. Once I had the full script, and I could then draw it. So you need that. I need it anyway. I'm very neurotic. I forgot what the other.
That's wonderful. Gosh, I mean, we've got so much there. And David, you know, if we had more time, I could talk to you all day. And I think we'll have to get you back and talk to you some more again another time, because we're just about out of time now. We've got the last 5 minutes of our show.
Let me tell you my last anecdote. Okay, I can't believe it's been an hour. That's insanity. I genuinely thought we'd only been talking about 10 minutes. I told you I didn't have any problem talking. So here is a very funny story about the two halves of your brain working. Okay, so I was on Come Dine With Me. Okay, and I had to think about how I was going to be, my persona, because I knew that being the way I am, I could come across as the villain of the piece, and they would take the piss out of me. So I knew going into the show that I had to be completely honest. I couldn't, no bullshit, no game playing. I had to be completely straight and honest. So my brain, the two halves, decided to work together. Okay, and it was really weird. It's never happened before. So there was the organizational side was working with the creative side in such an extent that both those halves, in my mind, I could see them doing this. Linking up. Okay, so my creative side, so the organizating side was the one that was doing all the talking. The creative side was writing all the gags, and I could see the gags being written and being slotted into place. So I could see the gags coming, right? And there came a point when I was being interviewed on the show where I read a joke that was 3 ahead of where I was, and I started laughing early because it was such a funny joke, and it was my brain setting things up. It was incredible. I could actually see it working that way. And it's one of the only rare times where my brain was working completely in harmony. And it was glorious. Absolutely glorious. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So that's it. That was the only time my brains actually worked in unison, where both sides came together. They could work. And it was wonderful to see it happen. So
there you go, folks. It can happen. The two sides of your brain can work in harmony at some point.
Yes.
If it hasn't happened for you yet, it might.
If not, find it in the dark corner and beat the living shit out of it.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Well, hopefully you'll bend your brain and join us again another time, David.
I would love to. I'd love to. I hope you found this useful. This has been like a great therapy session. Thank you. I really feel like we've covered some good ground, and I feel like I've taken some great steps forward.
Our pleasure.
We're great, we are. No, and it's all part of creatives being together, David, and that's what our creatives group's all about, is sometimes just kicking back, chatting with other creatives, say getting it off your chest, having a bit of a whinge if you need to, or as you say, when you're chatting with other artists about something that you're drawing or trying to create, and getting that feedback to banish those bloody mind monkeys when you're looking at it thinking, oh, this is just a pile of poo, and somebody's saying it really is not. What was wrong with it? What's wrong with you for thinking it's shit? You do need to banish those mind monkeys, and when you've got like-minded great people around you, it's just nice, isn't it, Julie?
Yes, Melanie.
Right, we're at that point of our show.
Right.
We are going to do.
She's the left brain, I'm the right. Oh no, she's the right, I'm the left.
I don't know what I am.
Either way, it's the enemy.
She's very good at organisation. Mind you, I'm very good at organisation too. So
I'm very good at organisation in very short spurts. It's when it holds my attention. It's when it holds my attention, it's like when I have to zone in and do something, I can concentrate on it, and I can do a load of stuff in maybe 1 or 2 days, and then it's like, no, I'm bored with that now, and then I might not do anything like that for a week. That's the problem. But we're going to play our values jam game. So I'm going to shuffle the cards, and we're going to talk about, well, when David's picked a card, and I wonder what card we'll get this time, Julie, because we've been really, really lucky with but not lucky, it's just been really weird. It's like woo-woo weird.
Well, I think whatever card we get, we're going to get an answer from David that will be mind-blowing.
Absolutely
it really
right.
doesn't matter what much it is.
Okay, right, I'm going to spread the cards out. I'm just going to run my finger along the cards, David. So you just say stop when you want to, and I will pull a card.
Hold it up to the camera.
Yeah, hold it back to camera.
Now, your camera's not there, it's in the middle. There you go.
I can see it. Okay. All right, stop. Stop, yeah. Yeah, there you are. Yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
What are these things?
These cards, right, I'm not going to do my normal spiel, Julie. These cards are created by a friend of mine, and they encourage conversations. They did it more for business, encouraging people to talk about their values, because values-led conversations are really important. And this is why we love them here on the show, is when you are talking to people and building, that know, like, and trust factor, people do business with people whose values align with their own. And in business, you kind of need to do business with people whose values align to your own. So they came up with this concept of values jam, having sort of a jamming conversation about specific values, because they found that people find it really hard to talk about. When people say, what are your values? The normal kind of bollocks trots out, like, oh, integrity, honesty, blah, blah, blah. But, values are anything that's important to you, and there's a lot of them, and they can all mean different things to different people. So they came up with these wonderful cards, and I usually do go into a little bit of a meltdown when I have these cards on, David, because they're really soft and silky, right? And I really like touching them. Every time
we have somebody on the couch, she's trying to get her hands on those cards, and she's describing.
And I have a bit of a moment, David, and I'm like, oh, my precious cards. Anyway, right,
what
stop.
have I taken?
That will be, yeah, exactly. Let's get on with it.
Yeah, I know this now, Melanie.
Perseverance is your card. Perseverance. Right. So our first question to you on perseverance is, what does perseverance mean to you? What does it look, feel, and sound like?
I would say that everything I've said so far has been about perseverance. I mean, basically, fucking if the worst they can say to you is no. Fucking if they can't take a joke, you're just got to keep going. Don't let anyone tell you can't do it. Unless of course you're murdering somebody, and then saying, do you mind stopping? It might be a good idea.
Yeah, well, there are limits,
Yeah, there are limits. Thank you. There are limits. Yes. Let's draw the line at murder. Let's say that's our baseline grid. Is that we're not murdering anybody here? Okay. I think that's a good start. Beyond that, it's just persevering. It's committing yourself to it. It's actually seeing it through to the end. It's also knowing. Don't strive for perfection. I think perfection is the killer of creativity. Just strive for as good as you can get, okay? It doesn't matter. No one's going to... So I'd launch into another rant about something in drawing. People get wound up about perspective, okay? And I always say to artists, no one's going to check with a ruler, you know? If you're slightly wrong, who cares? As long as it roughly works, it's fine. So persevere what you're doing. If you want to do something, do it. If you want to do a 6-page story, do it. Don't give up. Go through to the end. Finish it. For God's sake, finish it.
I think that is true.
What does it look like?
Yeah,
It looks like.
I
don't know what it looks like. It sounds like this.
It might look like a really long road stretching out in front of you, going on forever.
No. What it looks like? No. Oh no! I tell you exactly what it looks like. I was going to make a joke, but I'm not now. But you're almost, Melanie. You're almost right from my point of view. What it is, it's a really long tunnel. It's not a road. It's a really long tunnel. And when you start, all you can see is black. But then suddenly, off in the distance, you see a little pinprick of white. And then you keep going to that, and that pinprick, that white, will be the ending. So that's perseverance. Is that tiny little pinprick of light at the end of an incredibly long tunnel. That's what perseverance looks like.
There you go. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Oh, well,
hey.
It's a hard slog to get to that little tiny pinprick of light.
But it's also wonderful because the closer you get to it, you realize, and this is the one thing I love, is I love endings. And I think that when you have a project, when you have the ending in sight, you work towards the ending. The crazy thing is I was talking about the whole thing about I get such a buzz out of being creative. Well, I dread endings because when I end it, it means I'm going to stop drawing and then I'm going to have to start and find the passion again. Because once I've started, I can't stop. And it's almost scary that it's so addictive. It really is. It's sort of, I've only started now doing a new project. It's a project I've been planning all year. You said something funny earlier on about talking to other creative people. There's a trap you can fall into as a creative person. You can talk an idea out of existence, because the whole thing about, especially from a comic point of view, if you have an idea you want to tell, a story you want to tell, if you tell too many people that idea, you don't need to tell the story anymore because it's done its job. So be careful of who you tell your ideas to, because in a weird way, if you want to draw comic strips, you need, or tell a story, write it. Don't just tell it, because otherwise you'll lose the need for it to exist. So I think that's quite good. So talking to other creative people about how they deal with, there's a really funny question which gets asked, which is always the wrong question. They always say, where do you get your ideas from? Which is a really annoying question because they come from everywhere. So that's not the question. The question should be, what inspires you, not where do you get your ideas from? Because you get your ideas from the same place. Anyway, I get my ideas walking down the road. I get my ideas falling over in the street and rupturing my Achilles tendon or whatever. I get ideas all over the place. But it's what inspires you. Where do you get your inspiration from? That's the most exciting question you can ask a creative person. What inspires you, you know? And if you can get to the core of it, that's what I love. I love talking to people about that. I love talking to creative people about that. And also how they deal with writer's block. I find that fascinating because I also love the way that writer's block affects everybody. And then the thing I always ask creative people is, what's your favorite meal you like cooking? I'm always fascinated. I've always been this theory that creative people like to cook, but I don't necessarily think that's true. But anyway.
So one last question, David.
Yes.
Where do you get your ideas from? I think we're going to turf you off the couch now.
Okay, folks, that really is it. That's all we've got time for. David, it's been an absolute pleasure. And we will see you. We'll see you all next time. Bye for now.
Bye.